Morning everyone, it's Clive. Welcome to the Mitchell Brewery. It's another, well it was sunny earlier, lovely day in Nottingham. And I've got the boiler on. Well actually I've just turned it off and it's waiting to cool down to strike temperature. I've got my ingredients. Bit of a mend and make do recipe today. I'm using up all the remainder of my grain, so hence the porridge oats. I've got the remainder of my crystal, my marisotto, my amber malt, and my wheat malt, and I've got all my other paraphernalia. I've got my little book for recording, my trusty sterilising tablets. I've got my hops in the corner. I'm using Citra and Target today, and let's hear it for Graham Wheeler. This is the best brewing book in my opinion. This is the one I started with, so if you're just starting out, I heartily recommend getting a copy of this book. So no further ado, let's crack on with the brewing. Happy brewing everyone. Okay, so when the water reduced in temperature to less than 80, I transferred 8 litres into the mash tun. This needs to cool down to about 72 degrees, so I'm going to let that just sort of warm up the mash tun for a few minutes, then I'll add my grain. Next thing to do is to refill the boiler and get this thing boiling again. So I can see I've marked a line around the inside of my boiler for roughly about 2/3, because I don't want to fill it right up today because I've not got a full amount of mash. I've only got a grain, so I've only got just over a couple of kilos, whereas really want at least a minimum of 3 or 4 kilos. So I'm going for a reduced volume because otherwise I'll end up with quite a thin beer with a low alcohol content. So let's crack on with that. So all the grain's been added, so all I need to do now is give it a good old stir and then seal it up. The mash tun will now sit here for 90 minutes. I can see I've put this cover on it and I'm just wrapping an old duvet over it as well, just to give it a bit of extra insulation. So it's going to be a while before it comes out and goes back into the boiler. So meantime, I'm going to crack on. There's all sorts of other things to do, like the yeast and sterilisation of all my containers. So yeah, no rest for the wicked. While I'm waiting for the mash tun, I'm going to crack on with hydrating the yeast, and what I'm using today is this dry ale yeast, and I've got 110 mils of boiled water which I've put into this container. These are this Michelin cylinder and this beer festival mug are being sterilised by the boiling water itself. I will then tip the yeast into this mug and then just let it, when the water is less than 30 degrees C, of course, because otherwise if I tip it in now it will just kill the yeast off, so it has to be less than 30 degrees C, and then that will then hydrate the yeast and it swells up, and then you pitch it into the bitter wort later. This is the primary fermentation bin. This is where the bitter wort will go with these later. What I'm going to do, it was not too bad, but it has to be spotless, has to be sterilised, so I use this stuff. This is malted sterilising tablets, and as I always say, if it's good enough for babies, it's good enough for beer. So there's the lid, so I'm going to pop a couple of these tablets in here with some water. So I'll start it off with cold water and I'll probably go and boil a kettle, and then that the warmer water will help accelerate the dissolution of this, and then I'll fill it right up and add it, pop in the bubbler and other things in there to make sure everything is sterilised. Time to tip the yeast into the cold water. You can see it's basically little sort of very fine granules of yeast, and all you do at this stage is just tip it in, and then I'm just going to let that sit for 15 minutes, come back and I'll give it a stir, probably with the thermometer because that's actually sterilised. I've attached a small piece of plastic pipe onto the boiler tap, and it's fitted with this fine rose from a watering can. This will be used for the sparging. Normally sparging's 80 to 85, it dropped below 80, so I've just put the boiler back on for 5 minutes. So we've got about another 5 minutes before we reveal the mash tun. Okay, time to reveal the mash tun. This is one of my favourite stages. Let's get rid of the covers on this thing and take off the and hopefully that's maintained a decent temperature inside the mash tun, and this is the bit I like. Oh, malty goodness in there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to basically drain off this first sweet wort into here, and then I'll drain this through here to try and capture some of the fines. Okay, let's turn the tap on the mash tun on. Looking a little darker than I anticipated. It's amazing how much a small amount of dark coloured grain can colour the whole beer. Hey ho, that's fine. Hope it tastes nice. Quite a lot going in there. The idea of sparging is that we use this boiled and cooled water, so we're between 80 and 85 degrees C. This washes all of the remaining sugar present in the malted barley into here, into what we call the sweet wort. The sweet wort is the sort of sugary solution that this will go back into the boiler. We add the hops, which then adds the bitterness. The sweet wort is then converted into bitter wort. When that's finished boiling with the hops, we then add the yeast when it's cooled down, and then that ferments to become the beer. So at this stage, all we're doing is essentially just washing this malt. So let's turn it on. You see, quite a nice fine spray. I'm just going to play that backwards and forwards over here. This will take about 10 or 15 minutes, so I won't video the whole thing. Be a bit boring. Just struck me that I've actually got 2 brews on the go, as well as my beer and a cup of tea. So this is what I've ended up with for the sweet wort. This will go back into the boiler and get boiled up before we add the hops. We've got the leftover spent grain. Not a lot I'm going to do with that. I don't make spent grain cookies or have a pig to feed it to, so I'm afraid that's going to get lobbed when it's cooled down. I'll just let it drain off the last little bit. So let's crack on. Here we go. You can see that the sweet wort's around about 66 degrees or so at this stage. A little bit warmer than it normally is when I do it, but I think I used sparging water, which was a bit hotter, as recommended by Graham Wheeler. So always ask all day when you're brewing. Always keep consulting the books just to make sure you're doing it right. That's what I did today. So very fond of my little thermometer. Boiler is filled and set to boil, so it's about 64 degrees at the outset, so it's quite full, but we do actually lose quite a bit on evaporation, so I don't want all that. I want to reduce the volume down, so that will happen. Lose about 10 or 15% due to evaporation, roughly, so that should hopefully do the trick. Whoa, that's what I call a rolling boil. So the sweet wort is ready for the hop addition. I better get my skates on and get it all weighed out then. Let's get this fan on. It's getting a bit steamy in here. First hop addition is Target, and you can see this is what we call leaf hops. The other type is pellet. I prefer leaf because this doesn't disintegrate down into dust like pellet does, which just gums up the work in my opinion. So all I'll do now is just add this into the boiler, and where's my spoon gone? I'll go and find my spoon. Found my spoon. So the hop addition is one of my other favourite phases of the brewing process, because this is where you start to get all the fantastic beery aromas from the resin from the hops. So let's give it a good stir, and this will then boil for an hour and a half, and the last 10 minutes of the boil will add the citra. I've added the copper chiller into the boiler. This is used to help cool down the bitter wort after the boil's finished. If you can see, this is just a copper coil. Water goes in at the bottom, spirals round and then acts as a heat exchanger, and then the hot water comes out of here. So you can see I've got a lovely long, great big long connection of hoses to the outside tap. This is very effective. It usually takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to put it down from 100 to less than 30. The next and last addition of hops is the Citra, 20 grams here. This is going in, and this is the last 10 minutes of the boil. So I'll add that and I'll give it a good stir. That's the end of the hot boil, so let's just turn off the boiler and let's go and turn on the chiller, and hopefully those joints hold. Somewhere there's a kink. So far so good. Hear the water going through there. This is where I find it spitting all over the place in it. Oh no, pretty good. And you can feel straight away the cold going in there and the warm going in there. So let's see how long that takes. So you can literally watch the temperature drop with something like this. So I won't video the whole thing, but it'll take about 10 or 15 minutes to drop right down. There we go, that's not too bad. So okay, it's not up to the usual 25 litres, but it's not too bad. We got about 17 litres in there, so we should get, I don't know, about 25-30 bottles out of that, which is great. And this just needs now to go in the house and the yeast pitched. Okay, the bitter wort is in the house. It just remains to add the yeast. I'll then seal it up and then leave it for a week before I do the second phase of brewing. It's a week later and the primary fermentation has done its job. It's finished bubbling. I have got my pressure barrel all thoroughly sterilised. I've added some finings. I've also added 80 grams of sugar into this container and added 250 ml of boiled water. I'm just letting that to cool down. So what I'm going to use my siphon to transfer this into the pressure barrel. This time I'm going to leave it in the barrel for about a week before I push into bottles. According to Graham Wheeler, what I've been doing is particularly bad practice, which is transferring directly from this into here and not really giving much of a gap between that and bottling. So at least a week or 2 weeks, and then in bottles for another month. So let's see if my beer improves as a consequence of this best practice. So let's get on with the siphoning. This is the lid off. You can see most of the yeast has settled to the bottom. This is my siphon. This will go to about here above the layer of sediment which you can see there. The other end of the tube will then go into the barrel and then I'll transfer the beer. This is the siphoning process. It's fairly straightforward and we'll see how we do, and I will add the sugar to the pressure barrel when it's cooled down. Quick check of the hydrometer reading for the beer after the primary fermentation. As you can see, got a reading of 1.006. If you use that in conjunction with the original gravity, and you can see the calculation here, you come up with an alcohol content at this stage after primary fermentation of 3%. That ain't bad. So I'm hoping that after the second stage of fermentation we'll get up to my prediction of at least 3.3 or possibly higher, which I'm quite pleased about. So interestingly, it does taste a little bit different from my previous beers, and that's because I've used some other ingredients. So let's see how we go. So the beer is sitting in this pressure barrel for a week. I'll release the pressure off of here. So that's what you're supposed to do apparently, let out all the bad gases. So I've invested in this thing called a bottling wand. Now you can see that I've attached it to the tap. The tap's on, and basically there's a little thing here, and then when you lower that into the bottom of the bottle, that goes up, and then that's the beer out, and then when you take the bottle away, it seals again. So let's see how this works. I've got a bottle ready. So what you do is you literally just insert the bottle like that. Oh, look at that. If I release it, it stops. Oh, I like this. This is really good. Much better than my old technique of filling in using just a measuring jug. Oh, perfect. Well, I'm impressed. Very, very simple. I must admit I was a little bit dubious about this, the use of this bottling wand, but it's working extremely well. So I'm going to just show you again. It's very impressive. So literally we just put the bottle, and you can see it touches the bottom and it just fills the bottle. So what we're doing now is minimising the amount of air getting into the beer. So I've had to put that at the bottom just to catch the drips, because it's a bit drippy doing it this way, but that's fine. So we get to the top here, and then oh, there you go, that's done, and then it just holds. Fantastic. Oh, I'm really pleased with that. I've got 36 bottles of beer out of that batch, and I thought it was going to be a bit of a half measure. Last thing to do now is add half a teaspoon of brewing sugar to each of these bottles, just to try and kickstart and prime the sort of secondary carbonation in these bottles, and then I'll leave them in the bottles in my cupboards for about a month, and then we'll see how we go. And next thing, I've got my trusty laptop out. I'm going to design some labels for the bottles and get them all labelled up. There we go, 36 bottles of beer all tucked up, and just waiting for the labels, and so I'll revisit those and have a taste in 4 weeks' time. Okay, that's the end of the video everyone. Cheers, happy brewing!